There's some interesting history behind the 1985 Blade Runner game for the Commodore 64. CRL Group, the company that made this game, wasn't actually able to obtain permission to make a Blade Runner game due to rights issues. So instead they decided to make a video game interpretation of the film score by Vangelis. When I first read that, I thought this game was just going to be a bunch of musical notes bouncing around the screen. But no, it's an actual game that you can play. And as for the whole video game interpretation of the score statement, well, that really was just a dodge to get around the rights issues. It's pretty clever, actually, but I doubt anyone could get away with that kind of bullshit today. But that's enough history. Let's get into the review. Blade Runner, a video game interpretation, Blade Runner for the Commodore 64. The game's graphics are decent, yet somewhat underwhelming. There are two different types of screens in the game. One is the Overworld Map and the other is the street scene. As you can see, the Overworld Map is very basic. Your Blade Runner and Spinner is represented by a yellow diamond, and the replicants are represented by the flashing yellow, red, and blue squares. Oh, I'm sorry, they're not replicants, they're repladryads. Dictionaries, guys, they do help. Anyway, the city is laid out in 9 different squares or sectors, and again, it's very basic, just green lines representing the city's buildings. The graphics are very flat, but they do represent the city well enough, so I can't fault them too much, especially when you consider how long ago this game was made. On the other hand, the street scenes do have a bit more detail. I particularly like the background ads in each sector. Also, the Spinner doesn't look too shabby. It's not quite like the film, but close enough. But the Blade Runner and the people on the street, Christ, they're fucking awful. In fact, they look less like people and more like fucking ghosts. To be fair though, the technology was limited, so this might have been the best that they could do. Although I can't help but think that a little more color and detail might have made the characters look better. As they stand now, the character design is very unappealing. The controls are very simple and you can designate how you want them before you start the game. For example, I use the directional buttons on my keyboard and the control button to fire. You move around the overworld map using the directional buttons. When you land on one of the replicant squares, you press the fire, or in my case the control button, to confront them on the street. Once you land, you control the Blade Runner with the directional buttons. Up moves him onto the sidewalk, down moves him onto the road, forward moves him forward, and back moves him back. Very basic. And to shoot a replicant, you press the fire button. As for the gameplay, it's not too bad at first. You locate which sectors the replicants are in by looking at the screen in the upper right-hand corner. If a certain sector is flashing, that means that one or more replicants are there. After that, you go to that sector, land on a replicant square, and press fire to go down to the street level. However, in the beginning, you can't take on the higher class replicants represented by the blue and white squares. They're sort of like the Nexus 5 and 6 class of replicants in this game, and you have to take on the lower classes first. You can take on the Nexus 1 through 4 replicants in any order that you like. In this part, you have to chase down the replicant while dodging the people on the street and the cars in the road. A scanner in the middle of the screen will tell you how close you are to the replicant, as well as warn you when cars are coming near. Once you're in range of a replicant and you got them targeted, the scanner will briefly turn white. This is the time to shoot them. If you get them, the ticker on the bottom will say hit. In the lower right-hand corner of the screen, there's a bonus indicator. And if you take out a replicant before it hits 0, you'll get a bonus. The toughest part of this whole chase is catching up to a replicant and staying with them. If you crash into people too many times, the replicant can get out of scanner range. Once this happens, you lose the round. The spinner reappears, you get in it, and go back to the overworld map. And there you have to track down the replicants once again. You can also lose the game by having a car run you over. And since you only get 1 life, that means it's back to the beginning screen. You can also lose by shooting recklessly and retiring 1 human too many. So you have to make sure there aren't any innocent civilians in the way when you shoot. Dodging both the people and the cars can get very difficult because there's so many of them and they keep on appearing over and over again. But there is a little trick that you can do to help yourself in these levels. If you run in a straight line on a spot right near the edge of the sidewalk, you can avoid both the people and the cars. Yeah, right, it's cheap as hell, but it works. Anyway, once you retire a replicant, you go back to the overworld map and do it again. And here's where the big problem comes in with the gameplay. It is so fucking repetitive. You go to a sector, you find a replicant, you go down to the street, you retire them, rinse, lather, repeat. And sometimes these chases on the street can be very, very, very long. I mean, look at this shit. I just keep on running and running and running. If this guy ran anymore, he'd end up in Las Vegas. But the weirdest and most annoying thing is that sometimes retiring the replicants comes down to sheer luck. On some occasions, you'll be able to kill the replicants almost instantly, but in others, you'll have to run through the whole goddamn city before you can get them. Another strange thing is that I don't think the hired number replicants are the hardest ones to kill. No, I think the hardest ones to kill are the 2s. And why, you might ask? Because they stay right at the top of the fucking screen where all the crowds congregate. And if you go up to nail them, chances are you'll crash into the people and get slowed down. The 1, 3s, and 4s at least go down to the curb, making them slightly easier to take out. When you finally eliminate the Nexus 1 through 4 classes, you can go after the higher level replicants. But it's still the same goddamn mind-numbing shit that it was in the past 4 levels. At this point, I just wish they added a little more variety into the game. For example, what if you had to do a Voight Comp test on Rachel or another replicant? Or maybe you could fight Roy Batty or Leon or track down some clues or do anything else except chase replicants down a goddamn street. If you can stand the repetition in this game for more than 10 or 20 minutes, I gotta give you credit, because I couldn't. And look, I realize that a lot of games are repetitive to one degree or another. But when they're this fucking repetitive, it becomes a chore to play, and that's not what video games should be. If they had given you anything else to do, or at the very least ended the game after you killed 5 or 6 replicants, then I would have liked it a bit more. But nope, they just keep on having you chase replicants and kill them. Despite the game's problems though, it does have one other good point. Namely its rendition of Vangelis' music from the movie. Given the audio limitations, I think they did a good job with the end theme. Here, listen. The only problem is that it keeps on playing over and over again, but it's still a good rendition nonetheless. All in all, I'd recommend the game, but only as a good diversion that you might play for 10 or 20 minutes. Beyond that, however, it becomes way too tedious to continue. So in conclusion, I have to give him credit for trying to make a Blade Runner game back in the day. And I really have to give him some credit for finding a clever way to bypass the rights issues. If you enjoyed the movie, then I think it would be worth your while to play this game for a short time. This is Film and Stuff signing off. Thanks for watching. If this guy ran anymore, he'd end up in Las Vegas.